Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the ASX and Sectors weekly chart analysis for the week ending 2nd of May 2025. The first chart is the parent index. This is the S&P ASX 200 index. And you can see pretty clearly that the market has broken out above the buying support which emerged recently, particularly on this bar here, where price thrust lower but closed well off its lows on very high volume. This was buying support come in. Next bar was up, which confirms to a reasonable extent the buying seen previously. Following bar was up, and it closed right at the important level, around this 8,000 level. And this week, price has broken out above this buying support. The low volume, the 2 weeks previous, reflect a 4-day week and a 3-day week down here. So the 4-day week is 80% of normal volume, and the 3-day week 60% of normal volume. Price has pushed up pretty strongly this week on average volume, so it's genuine volume. It's not excessive, but it's not low volume. You would normally expect there would be some resistance in this sort of level here. And that's where the market's closed this week. Although it has pushed above the lows of that level in there pretty easily by the looks. So I'm not expecting a great deal of resistance at that level. Highs of the overall range come through up here. And that's where the market's likely to head towards, given reasonable trading conditions. But this week's bar, closing up near its high on genuine volume, was certainly a very positive move. This is the mid-caps. And the mid-caps are comprised of the bottom 50 stocks in the ASX 100 index. You can see the buying support, similar to the parent index here on this bar. This is where the buying support came in. Volume was pretty high, perhaps not quite as high as on the ASX 200 index, but still quite high overall. And if we mark the same two levels for the highs of the range, you can see this market is lagging a little bit behind the parent index. Perhaps there was a little resistance drawn out around here, which caused some difficulties for the market. Similarly, though, the highs of the overall range are right up here, so there is quite some room to move for price to get up towards that level. But still, the market's closed considerably above the highs of this level where the buying support has come in, which come in through here like this. This is where the buying support has emerged. And similar to the parent index, next bar was up, helping to confirm the buying. Next bar was up again. Didn't quite reach up to the highs of the range like the parent index did, but this week has seen price move higher on pretty strong volume, similar to the parent index. This is the small ordinaries index, and this is comprised of the bottom 200 stocks in the ASX 300 index. This is the smaller caps. And this market is lagging behind the two larger indexes. You can see prices really only moved up to the highs of the range here. Buying support was still pretty good here, but the volume, the amount of activity on that was actually reduced. So it does seem as though it was the larger stocks which were really well supported on this pullback where the buying support came in. Next bar was up and a little bit of a catch up. It wasn't within this bar's range. And the following bar was more a test for supply with a little bit of enthusiasm in the top rather than a push higher like it was in the larger two indexes. And that left this market about that far behind. So there's been a bit of catch up this week. Prices pushed up to the highs of the range. And similarly, here's the overall highs up here. So there's a bit of room to move here on this market as well. So price could move higher with some relative ease given favourable trading conditions. This is the financial sector, easily the largest sector on the ASX by some way. And the first thing you can see on this chart is that the overall pullback was nowhere near as severe in this market compared to the other markets. And this bar here actually saw buying support come in and hasn't even closed below that bar. If we just go back and have a quick look, here's the ASX 200 index, and this bar here has closed below the low of this bar before the pullback and buying support came in. Then we go back to the financial sector, and this bar here is nowhere near the lows of this bar. So you can see that the market's not pulled back as deeply here, and buying support did come in to close well off the lows on this bar on pretty strong volume, the highest volume on this chart. So strong buying support came in. Here's the highs of the range. You can see that the week after the buying support emerged, price did push higher and confirmed to a large extent the buying support which we saw on this bar. And then the next bar actually pushed above the highs of the range, where the other markets only saw price come up to this level. And then you've had further upside follow through this week. This is a pretty strong move overall, and it's showing you the market sentiment is really quite positive. Prices moved past this level as well, where I suggested on the parent index some resistance may be drawn out, although the market did move above it or within that range pretty comfortably. And the highs of the range overall are up here, and there's nowhere near as much room to move above. So this market did not pull back as deeply as the overall market and is recovering more quickly than the overall market. There's strong buying support in this market. This is the metals and mining subsector. I choose to use this sector rather than the materials because I'm trying to reflect the miners and not necessarily just materials in general. So this is the miners, and here's where price broke down below this bar's low. Buying support came in, up bar in response, but then this was the shortened trading week. It's only a 3-day trading week here. Price didn't move as high there. And I guess there would have been some resistance being drawn out from this congestion here to the left. And this week's been a consolidation bar, a test for supply, if you will. And the market just spent the week absorbing the supply, probably that's being drawn out of this congestion to the left before there's even an attempt to push up to the highs of the range. If price is able to get above this level, it'll probably be significant because it'll leave behind a lot of the weakness down here and let price trade up into clear air or clearer air. You've got a little bit of fluff here. I don't think there's going to be a great deal in that. And then there may be a bit more up here if price was to get up there. But the pushback above this level here is possibly the most significant thing that could happen in the near term. So we'll just watch that and see how the market trades. This is the ASX gold sector. You can see price pulled back this week along with the underlying metal. What is significant is that spread narrowed considerably this week and volume was about average, so it was genuine. Note that last week, this was the short trading week. It should only be 60% because it was a 3-day week, 60% of the normal volume. Yet it was actually increased over the previous bar, which was a 4-day week. This was strong volume last week. Yet price only just pulled back and closed pretty much adjacent to the lows of the up bar prior to that. So there was some buying support still coming in there and stopping price really plummeting lower, really stretching lower. And then this week you've seen buying support come in, spreads narrowed, close in the middle, and the volume was still pretty good. It wasn't low, it was about average. So we'll call that genuine. I won't be surprised to see further consolidation around this level. Price could push higher off a bar like that, but I expect that it'll be more likely to see price moving sideways in here and perhaps use this as a period of consolidation after a pretty good run up. This is the energy sector, and we saw some buying support emerge down here on pretty strong volume, the highest volume that's on this chart, which is a little over a year. Here are the levels worth looking at. You can see that buying support came in on this bar, confirmed to a reasonable extent for the next 2 weeks trading. Prices popped up above this bar's high this week. I'm not sure if it's going to do that. I think it'll be more likely that price will come back and continue sideways within the range of this bar and build up some strength for a while. It could possibly move up and perhaps be rejected at this level before it pulls back, depending on how much enthusiasm's in the market. But I expect that price will probably trade sideways above or below this 7,000 level on this index and build up some strength before there's any serious push higher. This is the healthcare sector. You can see that buying support was only modest in this market. The volume was above the average, but it wasn't really high, and the close off the low was only a little off its lows. More buying support did seem to come in on this bar, or the market didn't encounter selling pressure, which on this 4-day week allowed the market to push up with relative ease. There was a test for supply early the following week, and price then pushed higher in response. That was the 3-day week, and then this market has pushed higher this week and above this congestion here, which is no mean feat really. It's done a pretty good job to push past that on average volume, so genuine volume. I expect there will be some further resistance drawn out from this level here. We'll see how that goes. And you've got the breakdown line coming through here and the highs of the range coming through here. So I do expect there'll be some resistance up here for sure if price tries to push back up into this level. But the price is going to have to encounter and absorb any supply that's drawn out of this level here first. So don't be surprised to see the market test for supply early next week. Just come back and absorb any supply that is drawn out of this level prior to a further push higher. This is the industrial sector, and it also showed a reluctance to move lower when the markets were moving lower. You can see here this market didn't really move much lower at all. Prices didn't stretch lower here. There was a reluctance to move lower, and that generally means there's buying support in the market. And then this bar here hasn't closed below the low of that bar at all. And there was buying support emerge in this bar on above average volume, but it wasn't the highest volume on the chart. But that's probably because there wasn't a huge amount of selling pressure in here in the first place. The market didn't want to go lower, and it stayed up higher overall. Prices pushed above the highs of the range, highs of this buying support section in here this week on above average volume. So there is some enthusiasm to push price higher. And here's the overall highs through here, and price is almost there already. So this market's showing relative strength compared to some of the other sectors and even the parent index overall. This is the consumer staples sector, supermarkets to a large degree in Australia. And you can see that price has worked its way higher more recently. The pullback here wasn't particularly deep, and it settled pretty much at the last gasp lows. Lows of the range came through here. initial highs here. There was a push higher. This is where the weakness came into the market. Price pulled back to the last gasp lows. These are the lowest lows of the overall range before buying support came in. Then there was a test for supply, a push higher in response, and then this little period here was some consolidation adjacent to the highs of the range before price accelerated higher this week. You've got some levels that come through here. Here's the highs of the overall range. That's the intermediate highs there. So there's some room up there for the price to move above. Volume was not particularly high this week, a little below the average, but the fact that spread was wide and far increased over the previous two bars suggests that selling pressure was low this week, and that allowed price to move high with relative ease on modest volume. So it's not looking like there's a great deal of selling pressure in this market at the moment. You may see an early test for supply in response next week, and then an attempt to push higher if supply is found to be low. This is the consumer discretionary sector, and it didn't really push that much lower either, and although it did close below this low only just modestly, buying support came in on this bar, but it wasn't particularly strong, or the volume suggests it wasn't particularly strong, but there was consolidation in response, then a push up to the highs of the range. This is all a bit messy in here, to be honest. Whether you want to draw it in there, that's a bit of a strange level. You can put it there. Anyway, you can build it up like that and see sort of a zone where the highs of the range were established, and prices pushed significantly higher and above that level this week on an increase in volume, but still only modest volume, and that also suggests that selling pressure was relatively low this week and price was able to move high with relative ease. Highs of the overall range come up here. I expect this is going to be mostly fluff. There may be a little resistance up there, but there is some room to move above. This market has shown relative strength as well. There was a reluctance to move lower here, although it wasn't as significant as some of the other sectors. And then price has recovered quite strongly in here before breaking out above this buying support this week. So it's a pretty good effort. This is the property sector, and you can see all these overlapping bars in here and then in here suggests that price was reluctant to move lower here. This chart's also a little messy. No doubt the buying support came in on this bar. It wasn't the highest across all the sectors, but there was definite buying support in here with the close well off that week's low, and price has consolidated in response within that bar's range before breaking out above this level this week. Highs of the range are right up here. This is the overall range. There's definitely some resistance going to be encountered through here, I expect, with the lows of that range probably going through there. So prices pushed up to that breakdown line there, which means that you'll probably see some sort of testing for supply, some consolidation and absorption of any supply that is already drawn out at the lows of this range prior to any attempt to push into that level, where I expect there will be some resistance drawn out, some selling pressure drawn out. Just back to the parent index quickly. After we've been through all those charts, you can clearly now see what's happened. Price did stretch lower here compared to some of the other sectors. Then there was a minor recovery. This bar here marking perhaps the highs of the range here on this high volume. This was the level where price broke down from, which matches nicely with this bar's high, which we've already marked. Price did push lower. This bar was well below that bar's low. Buying support came in, up bar in response, helps to confirm the buying support, push up to the highs of this buying support range in here, and then price has attempted to break out this week, and it looks like it's probably going to make a decent attempt at it with the overall highs up here, which I expect market will be drawn towards. While there's favourable trading conditions, this level will be like a magnet to some extent. So I expect price will attempt to go up there unless there's some sort of negative sentiment drawn out of the market. Okay, thanks for your time. Back again next week. See ya.